Some common mistakes people make with river reading and picking their line. Mistake number one is once they get in the rapid, even though they picked the line, they're not looking at the eddy where they want to go or the obstacles in their way. Instead, what they're looking at is their bow. And they almost get hypnotized by looking at their bow. By looking at your bow, all you see is water going everywhere, waves crashing over your boat. You get lost and confused, and you never get to your target. Instead, what you need to always focus on is the target where you want to go. That's rule number one for running the rapid. Now, if you're just getting started in whitewater kayaking and you're a class 1-2 boater, one of the things you're going to find a little more difficulty is gauging the speed of the current and actually getting in the eddy you're looking for. But the good news is you're only in class 1 and 2 whitewater, which means the rapids you are in, you can probably run the whole rapid top to bottom without eddying out. When you eddy out in the middle of the rapid, it helps break the rapid down. However, until you get really good at eddying out or get more comfortable catching eddies, you should look at a line from the very beginning of the rapid all the way to the flat water pool at the bottom of it. That's going to be your easiest way. After you get a little more experience and you can start catching eddies and you're comfortable catching an eddy, not only catching it, but catching it near the top of the eddy. Remember, the top is the upstream side. Once you're comfortable with that, you're going to find that all of a sudden, wow, it's actually easier to break it down. Catch the eddy, stop, re-scout, read the water again. For the second time, pick your next eddy and eddy on down to the next one. We call that eddy hopping. We also call it breaking the rapid up. Both of those things will make the rapids easier as you get better at eddy hopping. We talked about rocks. Well, there's a lot of things we can do with a rock. We can go around a rock and straight down the river. We can go around a rock and catch the eddy behind it. Or if the rock's not very high out of the water, we can even paddle right over the rock. Those are three basic things that you might decide to do with the rock. When a rock is in the way, most of the rocks are high enough out of the water, they create an eddy behind it. So anytime you see a rock in the middle of the river, it's usually a good indication that you have the opportunity to eddy out behind it. But always remember that you also have the opportunity, if the rock is just barely out of the water, you have the opportunity to paddle over it. Now, what's the beauty of paddling over a rock that's just barely under the water? The beauty is that behind it will be an eddy, and it will dump you straight into the eddy. You don't actually have to make the eddy turn. It's actually a little bit easier. There's one thing you do need to be aware of with rocks. The rocks are usually somewhat rounded, so the corners of the rocks, there's going to be more water going over them. More water means more of a hole. So if you're going to be going really close to rocks, be aware that almost every rock on the corner has some sort of a hole. That hole isn't necessarily something that's going to mess you up if you're aware of it. But if you're not aware of it, you're going to go over, hit the hole, probably catch an edge and do a roll. So my recommendation is, if you don't have enough experience to know whether there's a hole in the corner of the rock, to go just wide enough that you end up going around the hole. When reading water and determining whether that hole is going to be something that's friendly and something that you can just go right through or around, or whether it's going to be something you should really try to avoid, there's a couple key factors. A hole like this one right here behind us. If you notice, the hole, it's white and foamy, but remember we talked about the anatomy of a hole. There's the boil line. The boil line is where the water piles up in the foam pile. Some of it gets sucked upstream, some of it goes downstream. The more distance you have between the water coming into the hole and the boil line, it's essentially the bigger the hole, the more retentive it is. Retentive means that when you're paddling downstream, there's a lot of upstream moving water that's going to slow you down, maybe even suck you back into the hole, putting you into a surf. Now, if you're not very comfortable surfing a hole, don't have any practice with it, that's going to be a somewhat intimidating thing that you're going to want to avoid in the beginning. So, here's how you determine whether the hole is something that's going to stop you or whether it's something you're going to go right through. Basically, a good rule of thumb is if there's a lot of speed, the water's going really fast into the hole, and the boil line is less than 3 feet, you're going to go right through as long as you're fairly straight downstream. Even if the bow goes under, you should crash right through it. If it's more than 3 feet and the water's going in slow and vertical, what's going to happen is your boat is going to go down, the oncoming water is going to hit your bow, and you're going to get stopped. So the 3-foot rule is really going to be something that you can use when you're reading water to determine whether you're going to be able to get through. So here's your technique for going through holes. If you've got holes that beat the 3-foot rule, the water's coming in fast and the foam pile or the boil line is less than 3 feet deep, that means that you can go ahead and start paddling through them. Now if you drift into that same hole sideways, the hole's going to stop you, even if it's less than 3 feet. If you go in an angle, that hole's going to turn your bow, maybe side surf you out the side. If you hit it perpendicular, your boat's going to pencil in and go right through. Now how much it slows you down depends on whether you go on top of the hole or your bow goes under, the water hits you in the chest and stops you. We want to learn to keep our bow over the holes. If we can do that, then we've learned a huge skill in whitewater kayaking that's going to take us far. There's no way you'll want to be running holes that are over 3 feet if you can't keep your bow over them. So the technique is called boofing. Now the cool thing behind boofing is that you can run through holes and keep your bow totally dry. All the boof is where you jump on top. It's called a boof because it's the sound your boat makes when it hits the foam pile. Boof. I've got my paddle here because I want to teach you the boof technique. The key to boofing is not how hard you're paddling, it's not charging into a hole, but instead it's lining up in front of the hole, ideally in front of the part that's steepest, where it drops into the hole the steepest. Paddling up to it with the boat fairly straight downstream or perfectly straight downstream, reaching over the drop. So you put your paddle just over the drop of the hole and you take one long stroke, lifting your knees, one long stroke all the way into the hole. Now notice I say lifting your knees, not leaning back. Your objective when you take the stroke is to lift the bow up. So lifting the bow over the foam pile allows the bow to jump and you skid right through. A common boof mistake is to paddle hard, and right when you get to where the water's dropping into the hole is to lean back. Now when you lean back, you're actually pushing your boat down, your bow down. The bow goes under, you catch water in your chest, you get slowed down by the hole. That boof technique works whether you're boofing into a little one foot pour over or whether you're boofing a 15-foot waterfall. It's the same technique. And this technique will get you far, and you can practice it on the smallest features.